must never surrender. America will get better. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
Please welcome founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition, Reverend Jesse Jackson.
I feel that all of my work with Reverend Jackson has not been in vain. And the one thing that I am very happy about is that they are giving him credit for it happening under his watch. His efforts to change policies and rules for the Democratic National Convention is what made it possible for a Barack Obama and a Hillary and now a Kamala Harris to run for president.
When children win, when women children win, workers win, we must all come up together. We must come up together.
His 7 million votes that he got, almost 7 million in '88, helped to change the paradigm. Shirley Chisholm started it, but Reverend Jackson finished it because he went to the Rules Committee to make sure that everybody got accounted for. And so when I see her standing up there, I know she's standing on the shoulders of Reverend Jackson.
We're going to be talking about voter registration and get out and vote. We have to start with Reverend Jackson in 1984 and '87. He pushed the idea of voter registration. Hermine Hartman and I have estimated that Reverend Jackson might have registered as many as 6 million people over his career. That's a lot of people. No one else has done that kind of thing. So tell me, what did Reverend Jackson do to change the whole thing within the Democratic Party?
Having first run in 1984, he observed that there was a pattern and practice, if you will, within the party of winner takes all, was what the practice was called, and therefore they could take all of your votes, meaning that if you came in with 48% of the voters in a state and the winner came in with 52%, the winner would take all the delegates and you would be left with 0. Same thing if it were 5 people running and the winner of the state had 35% and the other contestants came in at 20%, the person had 35% would take all of the delegates and people would be left with 0. So a major rule change was to have proportional representation on your delegate count. So if you picked up 20% in Iowa and 30% in Maine and 50% in South Carolina, then you would have the cumulative number. But that rule change, it was so fundamental, so profound, that Mrs. Clinton would have had more winner-take-all states than President Barack Obama, because all of his delegates counted. By the time we got to the convention in Denver, he was the nominee.
It takes more than just registration. The why actually moves you. The why actually gets you out to vote. And so the idea that we understand where we came from, the idea that we understand the importance of the moment, the idea that we understand that this ain't the first time or the second time or the third time, and that God has given us another opportunity now to step up and step out into the promise. And so that is the why. That is the understanding that we have an opportunity to be greater than we've ever been before, and don't be scared of it. Don't be fearful of your moment. We've all prayed for greater times. We've all worked hard to be able to provide more for our families, to be able to provide a high quality education for our children, to be able to provide health care for our families that everybody can access. We've worked hard for it. This is the moment to guarantee it. Don't stop now. And so the why get you up in the morning. The why will make you move and step towards that promise.
So how do you all deal with the question of gerrymandering?
You know, which is a more complex issue, and you're the scientist, you know this better than anyone in the nation. And what I want people to understand is we don't have a general election that has a popular vote in all 50 states on one day. We have 50 individual state votes on our November 5th date of 2024. So having said that, it's more important where you win than how big you win. So Mrs. Clinton won versus Donald Trump. She had 3 million more popular votes, but because in certain states, in Michigan and other places, after the voting laws changed, she ended up with 70,000 fewer votes than Donald Trump. So his margin of victory was 70,000 votes nationwide that gave him the presidency in 2016. President Joe Biden had 6 million more votes than Donald J. Trump, but cumulatively it was 475,000 votes across 6 states. And when Donald J. Trump says, I need 11,780 votes, 11,780 votes could have swung a state in Georgia. I mean, so it's going to come down to less than 100,000 votes nationwide, so every vote does count. And so in our current environment, I would say that Mrs. Harris, and we have to push people to come out and vote our numbers, she has to trend 3 percentage points at least ahead of Donald J. Trump. Voter suppression is already baked into the system on people being kicked off of rolls. People that are watching this podcast are going to show up at polling places across Georgia, across North Carolina, across Michigan, and realize their name isn't on the rolls. And they're like, but I've lived here, I've always been voting here. So there's voter purging going on. And that's what we have to be careful of. And it's already in place.
If we have a majority of Democrats in the House and the Senate, is it possible to get through changing or eliminating the Electoral College and stop gerrymandering and voter suppression?
Sure. And let me be more pointed in answering your question. Thank you for that. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is very key to eliminating and redressing many of these ills, and that's being championed by Representative Terry Sewell and my colleague Nikema Williams. So there's a strong piece of legislation. When we have the House majority, and with Leader Hakeem Jeffries as the Speaker of the House, we can bring that vote to the floor. What I didn't realize, not having been in government but on the outside, is just the enormous power of the speakership, the person that controls which bills come to the floor. So, and on day one, when the Republicans took over and had their committee chairmanships enacted, civil rights came out of the Department of Education. So no more reporting of those numbers. And this happened wholesale. This is 2020. So when I say about Project 2025, it's already been in effect. The Heritage Foundation is very substantial, very sophisticated. They took so many former administrative officers out of the Trump administration, parked them on the sideline to get to work on these documents on what they would do next, on how they would recruit, the 4 pillars of the Project 2025 plan, and what they would plan on doing on day one of a new administration since he'd given them the green light that he was running. And so this has been in motion. The attacks on women's reproductive rights, the attacks on DEI. After we finally passed the budget a couple months ago, DEI was taken out of the office on Capitol Hill. That was on a Friday. By the time I came back to DC on Monday, there was no shred of evidence that office ever existed. The signage was down, the walls had been taped out, it had been painted over, it was white, it was gone. So they moved that office out so fast it would make your head spin.
And that was a substitute for affirmative action. So both are gone now.
Right, and so to your point, as you've always taught and said, I mean, affirmative action was the mildest sort of redress of to deal with all the issues and the history of lynching and segregation and enslavement and kidnapping of African people. It was simply saying factor us into the growth of America. And for that to have been removed, and basically the DEI office in Capitol Hill was a job placement center. Currently, these bills cannot even be considered. The Republicans aren't even letting us bring this to the floor for a vote. So there's been a pure disdain for anything civil rights. One of the more shocking things I experienced when we got to swearing in, and then they set the new rules, was the calendar for dates and votes and rules and committees, and they move all that furniture around. And on day one, when the Republicans took over and had their committee chairmanships enacted, civil rights came out of the Department of Education. So no more reporting of those numbers. And this happened wholesale. This is 2020. So when I say about Project 2025, it's already been in effect. The Heritage Foundation is very substantial, very sophisticated. They took so many former administrative officers out of the Trump administration, parked them on the sideline to get to work on these documents on what they would do next, on how they would recruit, the 4 pillars of the Project 2025 plan, and what they would plan on doing on day one of a new administration, since he'd given them the green light that he was running. And so this has been in motion. The attacks on women's reproductive rights, the attacks on DEI. After we finally passed the budget a couple months ago, DEI was taken out of the office on Capitol Hill. That was on a Friday. By the time I came back to DC on Monday, there was no shred of evidence that office ever existed. The signage was down, the walls had been taped out, it had been painted over, it was white, it was gone. So they moved that office out so fast it would make your head spin.
And that was a substitute for affirmative action. So both are gone now.
Right, and so to your point, as you've always taught and said, I mean, affirmative action was the mildest sort of redress of to deal with all the issues and the history of lynching and segregation and enslavement and kidnapping of African people. It was simply saying factor us into the growth of America. And for that to have been removed, and basically the DEI office in Capitol Hill was a job placement center. And so if you come from Iowa and you say, I care about diversity, I want to see more women included, I want to see more African Americans, I don't know where they are, I don't know how to recruit them. Being honest, I don't experience that many. You could call the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office and it'd be a repository for these resumes. For our young people that don't know their legislators and can't find their way around, that want to get involved in government, they could go to the DEI office and put their resumes, and there were great people in there, Dr. Moon and others, that could help them navigate, like no different than people that are first-time college students. One of the biggest predictors of college success is whether or not your parents went there. They can help you navigate the course load and how to get through. The same thing happens in trying to work in government. So that's what the purpose of the office was, but there's been so much disdain for that they've taken that out. And so now many young people that want to get involved, that come from our community, that don't have family members that have been involved forever, don't have that place where they can deposit, have a repository for their resumes to get involved in government. They want to serve. But affirmative action is gone from Harvard and North Carolina. You can't use, this is a standard at public and private institutions, but you can use affirmative action at the Military Academy of West Point and Naval Academy and those great institutions. Why do they keep it in the military academies? Black and brown bodies can go on the front line, but we can't get on a fast track to get to the boardrooms. Every member of the United States Supreme Court came from those selective institutions. Now they've raised the barrier of exclusion to have us out. If you speak a foreign language, if you come from a rural area, if you have legacy like George Bush and others, you can have access to going to, preferentially, to going into those selective institutions. But if you show that you've come from a history of discrimination, they said you can use all these other metrics except for race.
Well, that gets us to down ballot voting.
But look at what's happening in Georgia. So there is an electoral commission that was appointed, not elected, that is changing rules.
All of them.
By which people can register, by which people can be challenged, by which people can have access to the ballot. And it's a mockery. And these non-elected people have taken over many of these electoral boards, when you talk about down ballot, appointed by either the governor or the county or in some cases the city officials. So down ballot absolutely matters. And the Republicans in the last 5 years have gone full speed ahead on locking in these people in these institutions. So the same, not just election deniers, but the election liars have now gone to say, since we can't move our numbers up to bring out more votes to go for President Trump, let's move other people's numbers down or eliminate the people that are most likely to vote for an opponent. And that's what they've done. So that is very corrosive, it's very divisive, and it's very dangerous in our electoral system.
Getting back to the question of voter registration and get out to vote, Reverend Jackson and Harold Washington were two of the most important people in that whole push in the 1980s. Reverend Jackson, of course, as I said, Hermine Hartman and I estimate that he registered 6 million people to vote. Reverend Jackson did all that across the country. In fact, one of the commentators on television said that he was a crusader, and of course he was. But Harold Washington, while he was in Congress, was the ambassador throughout the country to push for voter registration and the Voting Rights Act. But we're also talking about saving democracy.
Saving our democracy means every vote counts. And what's so beautiful about that is, on that day, in the 2020 election, the housekeeper, the driver, the student, their votes counted as much as the billionaires.
Yes.
Saving the democracy means everyone has equal value on election day. That is like a testament to what a great country is. If people keep their enthusiasm up, we could be in for the golden era of African American history, or a very dark era.
Let's hope not.
We're talking about forward progress or going backwards in time. The next president of the United States will have the opportunity to nominate 2 chief justices on the Supreme Court. Many of the battles that have been fought, many of the rights that have been gained are on the ballot. Voter protection, fighting against voter suppression, access to higher education, diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure that everyone has a fair shot at contracts and compliance. In order to eliminate the history of discrimination, racism, sexism, all of this is on the ballot. What are we going to do about child care, which is an exploding cost on many people? And these things can be addressed in the child tax credit. We can also continue to invest in human infrastructure, which is something that the Biden administration and Harris administration has done. It's going forward or going backwards.